All right. Hello, everybody. We're a little bit early, but still, welcome to Daily Cal Live. My name is Sarah Harris, and I'm the editor-in-chief and president of the Daily Californian, which is the independent student-run paper of record for both the City of Berkeley and the UC Berkeley campus. Basically, the Daily Cal needs your help to stay open. We really hope that you'll enjoy tonight's show, and we'll push the donate button to help us out. But before we move on, we've asked some Daily Cal alums to share their experiences from their time at the paper and how it's helped them professionally. Tonight's video is brought to you by a Daily Cal board member and LA Times reporter, Jim Rainey. If you've seen some of our other broadcasts, his clip might be familiar, but it's too good to only show once. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. And we go.
Hey, I'm Jim Rainey. I'm a longtime journalist and enterprise reporter at the Los Angeles Times. I've enjoyed a really amazing career in journalism. I've been so lucky. I've gotten to go everywhere from Iraq, where I covered the U.S. occupation, to almost all 50 states, writing about presidential politics, meeting people like Al Sharpton and John Kerry and John McCain and Barack Obama. I've been to the heights of the Sierras covering environmental stories. I've been in the Catalina Channel writing about a long-distance swimmer. And it really all started, though, at a scruffy and glorious little newsroom in Berkeley at the Daily Californian many decades ago. I'm so fortunate to have gotten my start there, like so many other great journalists who've won Pulitzer Prizes and become editors and columnists. The other thing the Daily Cal produced for me is a lifelong partner and my greatest and most elegant and beautiful collaborator, Allison Bell Rainey. And that in turn produced Elizabeth Ford and Libby Rainey, Berkeley class of 2016. So as you can see, the Daily Cal mints journalists in many ways. And we've been around for almost 150 years. We dearly would like to keep it going for another 150 years, but that's probably dependent on you. We're in a real struggle on the fight for our lives right now. Lack of advertising income, COVID epidemic, the pandemic is really hurting us. So if you can, dig deep tonight, support the Daily Cal, and support the next generation of great American journalists. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, let me stop here. Okay. Well, thank you to Jim for that awesome video. But to shift gears, our guests for today are UC Berkeley Chancellor Carol Christ and Carolyn Jones. Chancellor Christ has led UC Berkeley since 2017, and Carolyn is a former Daily Cal editor-in-chief, as well as a seasoned reporter with EdSource. We're so glad to have them here today, and at around 6:45, they'll be wrapping up and could start answering any questions that you might have. So, okay, you can both take it away.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, for that great intro. And thank you, Chancellor Christ, for joining us today. And thanks, too, to everyone out there in computer land for tuning in to this new episode of Daily Cal Live. I first crossed paths with Chancellor Christ when I was an English major at Berkeley in the late 80s, and she was a professor of Victorian literature and head of the department. Looking back on those days, I realized I was very lucky indeed to divide my time between reading Faulkner up in Wheeler Hall and covering the Berkeley City Council for the Daily Cal. And I see now those two things are very closely related, actually. So
the sound and the fury.
Well, as I lay dying. Right. So Chancellor Christ rose up the ranks, the administrative ranks at Berkeley since that time. And then from 2002 until 2013, served as president of Smith College in Massachusetts. She returned to Berkeley in 2015, and then 3 years ago was named the 11th chancellor of the university and the first woman to hold that position. I think we all know that these are extraordinary times in the world of higher education. We have students and faculty and staff who are trying to navigate this brave new world of online education. And at the same time, we have this imploding economy that's left thousands of students in real financial hardship and their families. And on top of that, we have this reinvigoration of a civil rights movement and calls for social justice in the world of education, at large, and especially in the world of education. And UC Berkeley is at the forefront and at the center of a lot of these conversations that are happening. And another very important one too, which is COVID research. Some of the most significant discoveries with coronavirus are happening at Berkeley. So let's start with COVID. I know colleges all across the world have struggled with how to reopen safely for everybody and are weighing all sorts of competing and often contradictory needs. Can you talk about how the process went at Berkeley?
Yes, I certainly can. For me, the revelatory moment was a talk I heard by a biostatistician on our faculty, Nicholas Jewell. It was on the 6th of March, and it became clear to me from hearing his talk how exponential the growth of this virus would be and how dangerous it was. And the cabinet met immediately after that, the chancellor's cabinet, and we decided to move to remote instruction just 2 days later. The thing that is really challenging about making decisions, about leading in this context, the midst of this pandemic, is how quickly facts change on the ground, how quickly knowledge is changing. We've had a fairly conservative approach to the virus. I think what's happening at some of the universities, like the University of North Carolina, that chose to fully open and then had to close down almost immediately thereafter, has shown that we were right in the caution that we took. But we've gotten there by a lot of steps. We were working in March with 3 scenarios for the fall. Fully in person, fully remote, and a hybrid. We really thought as late as mid-July we'd be working in a hybrid mode. And then it became clear that as the pandemic started to spike in the Bay Area and in California, that we wouldn't be able to do that. So we moved to fully remote, although I hope that things will get better and we'll be able to do some limited face-to-face instruction at some point in this semester.
So, but there are students on campus right now. Can you tell us, what is a social bubble? I mean, we all see photos of these raging frat parties. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, social bubbles and raging frat parties are not the same thing. Okay. We have about almost 2,000 students in the dorms, and they moved in a very carefully choreographed way. They had to take a COVID test immediately upon arriving before they moved into their room. Then they had to sequester for a week. The move-in times were staggered so that there weren't a lot of the usual, move-in scene was not at all what students experienced this year, with lots of students, lots of friends, lots of parents. And then they got tested again at the end of the sequester. That's happening actually right now. And a social bubble is we're grouping students in 10 to 12 who become almost like a family. And their social contacts are limited initially to that bubble. They get their meals together. They can socialize with appropriate social distancing together. And then as we get better and better at identifying cases of COVID-19, of quarantining, of contact tracing, we'll be able to expand our social bubbles. Frat parties are a quite different thing entirely. Berkeley had its first big outbreak right after some fraternity parties on the 4th of July weekend. We're trying to use all the resources at our command. We're working together with the city to impress on students how dangerous, how much people who are having parties without social distancing, without masks, how much they're both endangering themselves and also other people. So we're working with the city to try to deal with that.
Looking into your crystal ball a little bit, I mean, how do you see this changing higher education in years to come? I mean, is there anything valuable that we're learning from all this?
I think there are a lot of things, Carolyn, that we're learning that are valuable from this. That a number of faculty have told me when they started teaching remotely, I discovered a muscle I didn't even know I had. And we've spent the summer working with faculty. We gave about 300 fellowships to graduate students working with faculty members to develop remote versions of their courses for the fall that represent the best practices in remote learning. We invested a lot of money into something we're calling the semester in the cloud. It's 31 courses, very frequently taken courses, gateway courses, required courses. And I don't think we're going to forget that when the pandemic ends. And so what we're learning about remote instruction will enable us to reach more people. It will enable us to really export some of the wonderful kinds of Berkeley courses that we have. So that's a real change. Another big change is that a lot of our staff working remotely now really enjoy working remotely. So I'm sure office work is going to change at Berkeley as it's changed in companies across the United States.
That's really interesting. It might help too with, impacted courses, broadening the university's outreach and so forth. Is that right?
That's exactly right. In fact, now that room size doesn't limit the size of courses, I know that there are some classes that were impacted that have raised their enrollment limits simply because we don't have to worry about the physical capacity of a room. And we're now doing a lot of planning for it's called the Data Hub. It's a data science building. It'll sit on the footprint of what used to be Tolman Hall. And the committee that's working on designing that building they originally had imagined a huge lecture hall in it. And now they've decided, no, we don't need a huge lecture hall anymore, that huge lectures are more effectively delivered remotely, where students can replay them, they can listen to them at their convenience. So I think particularly our really large lecture courses are never going to be the same after COVID.
Oh, I'm sure that's good news to many people.
I hope so.
So tell me, what's happening with COVID research on campus right now? Can you give us some of the highlights?
Oh, I certainly can. There is a faculty member, extraordinary faculty member named Jennifer Doudna. She is the creator, the discoverer of the CRISPR-Cas9 mechanism. And she, at the beginning of the pandemic, pulled all her lab together and said, we have to stand up and fight this virus. And she did two things. She created a robotic testing lab that immensely it expanded our capacity to test. She does saliva tests with a very fast turnaround. They use robots to do the tests. And she also changed the focus of her research to use CRISPR-Cas9 technology for therapeutics for the virus. So that's really exciting. We also have engineers that there's one engineer, Grace O'Connell, that's figured out how to change sleep apnea machines into ventilators. Then this isn't really a discovery, but it's really moving to me. We had a group of graduate students in molecular and cell biology that were mixing vats of hand sanitizer in the lab and giving them out to things like homeless shelters and jails, places where they didn't have enough hand sanitizer. So there's been just an extraordinary coming forward of the scientific community trying to figure out, first of all, what the biology of this virus is, how it works, but also trying to figure out therapeutics, trying to figure out in terms of its spread in communities, how it's spreading. We have a number of epidemiological studies going on that our faculty in our School of Public Health is doing. So it's really been extraordinary and, to me, very inspiring, the way in which so many faculty have changed the direction of their research to work on this incredible challenge that we're facing as a nation and as a world.
And it sounds like it's in many departments too, many different disciplines.
Yes, yes, and I've seen faculty working across departmental and school and college boundaries in new ways. People are really working together, trying to bring multiple disciplines to bear on this problem.
Well, Godspeed to all of them.
Yes, yes.
As we all know, the economy is in a complete nosedive, and UC has been hit especially hard. I understand that UC Berkeley will be facing a budget shortfall of $340 million this year,
That's
which
right.
is a combination of state budget cuts as well as lost revenues from students not living on campus and so forth. Now, as long as I've been alive, the university has needed more money. Can you talk about how is this different?
This is different. That's a really good question, Carolyn. This is different because every revenue source is affected. So the $340 million deficit, that extends, the time period is from the beginning of March till June of 2021. About 200 million is in what we call the auxiliaries. That's housing and dining, that's Cal performances, that's athletics. We've never had a budget crisis that's affected housing and dining before. I mean, that's usually such a solid part of our operations. But what's different about this particular budget crisis, it's affected every single source of our revenue. And enrollments in university extension are down. That's a very big income stream for the campus. Summer session enrollments weren't down, but the income was really down in summer session. So I think what makes this different, obviously athletics revenues are way down, in the sense that they canceled their spring season and have postponed any competition in the fall until at least January 1st. So athletic revenues are way down. So I think what's different about this crisis is every single revenue source that the university depends on is being affected by the financial consequences of the pandemic.
So, I mean, cuts seem inevitable across the board, I imagine. I mean, from your position, how do you prioritize spending? I mean, what do you save? What heads to the chopping block? How do you make these decisions? And in your mind, what are the priorities?
Well, the one thing we've committed to do is leaving the budget losses that are in the auxiliaries stay in the auxiliaries. So none of the budget losses in housing and dining, for example, or in athletics will bleed over into the core campus, that we're developing budget strategies that deal with those losses in the auxiliaries themselves. And then, of course, what we're going to protect are the academic programs. I still am optimistic to think that the fundamental financial model of the university is strong, and therefore what we have to do is avoid any action that damages the excellence of Berkeley, the academic programs of Berkeley. So we're trying to use reserves to the extent we can. We're trying to use debt as an instrument, but we want to avoid cuts that are damaging to the heart and soul of the university, which are the academic programs.
This would be a good time for a fundraising pitch, I think.
Well, funny that you should mention that.
What can we all do?
You can give to the Daily Cal, and you can give to the campus. One of the things that's been so inspiring to me is that we're in the middle of a campaign. It's a $6 billion campaign for the campus. And we had the kickoff of our campaign public kickoff on February 29th. That was just a week before we made the decision to go remote. And feels like a different world. But we have, I thought, when the pandemic hit and the financial crisis hit, that was consequent to the pandemic, that our fundraising would really decrease, really diminish. And we have not found that to be the case. We have, in the period between March and June, we actually had totals that were over the same period last year. Our fundraising has been over the same period in these 2 months, July and August, of July and August this year. So people have been extraordinarily generous in giving to the university and giving for things that are very moving to me. They're giving a lot to emergency financial aid for students. We just announced a $24 million gift just last week for the Fiat Look scholarships. Those are scholarships for our neediest students, first generation students. We had an alum, Kathy Kwan, who gave $1 million challenge grant for emergency financial aid to students who become suddenly needy in the pandemic. And people have been giving to COVID research. We've gotten over $21 million in donations for COVID research for the testing facility. So people are being just extraordinarily generous and really understanding the need. And so I'm so inspired by that, so grateful for it.
Well, that's really great to hear. I think, especially donations that help students during this time. I ended up giving some money too to scholarship funds and to the Daily Cal because so many students' families have just been really impacted by all this. People are out of work. They're just, it's so hard to stay in school right now. So I think it's really, important for everybody out there. Open your wallet, give.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So many people's financial circumstances are really changed. It's really graduate student aid is really, really important. So many graduate students, a spouse could have lost their job. They're struggling with kids at home like everybody else is, with remote schooling. And so we had a challenge grant for graduate student fellowships. We announced at our kickoff, it was $10 million matching challenge. And we've almost met that challenge, which is really great. So people have been coming forward and also giving money, which I plead for them to continue to do for graduate student financial aid.
So speaking of budget cuts, activists all across the country right now are calling, defund the police departments, including campus police. And I was just wondering what your take on this at Berkeley is. If you could talk about that, also in light of student safety concerns.
Mm-hmm. I certainly can. So we had, before the George Floyd's murder and before the consequent crisis about systemic racism and social injustice, we had been working as a community on policing. I appointed an independent advisory board on police accountability and community safety. It delivered its report at the end of June, and we're now working through its recommendations. It really imagines a real rethinking of policing. So one of the things it recommends that we've already decided that we're going to do is create a team of mental health professionals that will be responsible for what we call wellness checks and mental health emergencies. I think that's more appropriate than an armed police officer answering such calls. So we're working on that. We're working on reviewing the weapons that the police department has access to. We'll be moving the police department from Sproul Hall to someplace else on campus. This has been a concern of students for a long time. We've been moving a number of functions out of the police department that don't really need to be there. Getting keys if you lose your key, or fingerprint checks. So we're trying to, the police over the years have gotten a lot of functions that don't seem to really need to be in the police department. So we are divesting the police of those functions so they can concentrate on just the things that are essential to their function. Meanwhile, we're really asking the question, what is the best way to assure public safety, community safety, and wondering, whether there are ways in which we can use unarmed people, unarmed individuals. The campus is generally a safe place. Immediately off the campus is less safe, but we're really trying to ask the question, how can we fit response to the actual actual situation? So we'll be sending a response to the recommendations of the IAB probably sometime in the middle of September is what we've targeted for the time that we're going to respond.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's something, yeah, I think we'll all follow up on. You mentioned mental health, student mental health, and I just want to follow up on that a little bit. I know this has been such a hard time for students, K through 12 students as well as college students. I mean, how is the university responding to that?
It's such a hard issue. It's one of the issues people often ask me what keeps me up at night, and student mental health is one of the things that keeps me up at night. I mean, this is so hard a time. It's really so challenging in so many different ways. It's that the pandemic creates enormous amounts of anxiety. Our lives are all changed, and some people's lives are just completely upended. Loss of work, often loss of life of someone, and the circumstances in which some of our students are living are not great for mental health. Being alone in your room, studying remotely, is not really how human beings are meant to live. And so I worry a lot that we will have fewer eyes and ears open and seeing mental health problems as they're developing. The Tang Center has been terrific. It's been doing a lot of telemedicine with mental health, trying to make it available to meet the need. But it's a very great concern in these extraordinarily stressful times.
Yeah. Talking more about social justice a little bit, I know Cal has a long, proud history of being at the forefront of various civil rights movements. The free speech movement, when I was there, was anti-apartheid. What do you see as the university's role in this present day moment that we're having right now?
Well, I think our most important role is to look at ourselves and to see whether there are better ways in which we can support our underrepresented communities. We're doing a number of things. We really are looking at our public art, seeing whether there are ways in which public art can make statements about inclusion and belonging. What we want to do is really study, excavate the history of underrepresented communities throughout the history of Berkeley, making that story much more public and present. We have a number of unnamings of buildings that are in progress. That one of the things that many people may not know is that some of the founders of the University of California at that point, though it was at Berkeley, were people who came from the Confederacy, who had been slave owners. The LeConte brothers, for example, were. And people are very troubled by having buildings named after them. They had racist views. And so we're looking at the names of buildings and making sure that they represent what we want them to represent. So that's something that we're doing. We're trying to develop programs that provide more opportunities for underrepresented students, for internships, for research apprenticeships. And we're developing training programs to teach faculty, students, staff to combat anti-Blackness. There is an initiative that the provost is funding called Abolition Democracy that is going to raise the influence and the scope of African American studies across campus. So we're working on a lot of initiatives, and I've been meeting with a lot of groups, listening to them, hearing their suggestions, because I think what's most important for Berkeley is for it to become an anti-racist institution. Now, this isn't going to happen just by snapping one's finger. It's going to require a lot of work, a lot of self-inspection. But I think Berkeley's most important role is to really look at itself and make sure that we are providing an education for our students that is not only do we have a more diverse demographic on campus, but that we offer an equity of experience to our students.
When we were chatting the other day, you mentioned that Berkeley's taking a lot of steps to, bolster diversity and equity, and kind of one thing you mentioned is, to become I believe it's called, the official word is, Hispanic serving institution.
Right.
Can you talk about that and maybe some other things that are going on? You also mentioned something for Native American students.
I'd be delighted to. So one of the resolutions of our strategic plan which was approved in 2018, was to become a Hispanic serving institution within the next 10 years. So we're already 2 years into that. I am delighted to say that the class we admitted, the class of 2024, or the transfer class of 2022, is the most diverse by far that we've admitted since the late 1980s. So that I'm just thrilled by that. And we've seen a very substantial increase in our Black student population, and also in our Chicanx and Latinx student population. Now, we have to be focused on making sure those students have the best possible experience at Berkeley. I've also been thinking a lot about the Native American history, not only of this institution, but of this land. This is unceded land. The campus is on unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. One of the things that I learned through an article that someone sent me is everyone feels, that the Morrill Act, which created land-grant universities during the Civil War, it was one of President Lincoln's achievements, is a wonderful thing, and indeed it's created all our great public universities. But the land that was given to states to establish land-grant universities was largely Native American lands that the government had taken. So that there is, across the United States, this history in our land-grant universities of sitting on unceded Native American land. Something that I just learned recently that really interested me is that faculty glade, that lovely green spot in front of the faculty club, used to be an Ohlone village in the 1900s and before, and that the stream was very different from the Strawberry Creek you see today. It was rich with fish, and and there was a shell mound right there in the middle of our campus. So we're just beginning to think about what is the proper acknowledgement, what's the right thing to do to acknowledge this history. So we're working on that. What I'm doing is creating for both our Black community and for our Native American community advisory groups that will report directly to me and advise me as we try to develop initiatives that make Berkeley a more just place, a place that more transparently acknowledges its history, and to try to make our community better for our students of color.
I mean, from your perspective, why is this important? Why is this a priority? I mean, what's at stake here? Why does the university need to make this a priority?
I think there are lots of reasons. I mean, one is simple, it's social justice, but I don't think we can be a public university in the state of California unless we more fully represent the demographics of the state of California. And I believe that higher education is the surest path that we have to social mobility, to a more equal society. So therefore, it's important in this flagship university of the flagship campus of the University of California that we strive for a more diverse student body.
One thing here's a subject, I'm biased on this topic, but I wanted to ask you about the role of humanities. It seems that all across the country, universities and parents, everyone's pushing students to do more science and technology. And there's a huge demand to create data science, like you mentioned, and other science and tech fields. What do you see as the role of humanities in higher education right now? I mean, again, revealing my bias, how can English literature save us all at this time?
Well, I think literature. I mean, I've spent my scholarly life studying English literature, and I believe that narratives structure our world. There is not a subject, whether it's COVID-19 or the budget crisis or the systemic racism and social injustice, that we don't tell stories. The political campaign right now, the Trump campaign has a story, the Biden campaign has a story. And if you spend a lot of your time, as I have, a lot of your life, studying narratives, you learn how to tell stories and you learn how to read the stories, whether those stories are in a novel or those stories are the stories that people tell themselves about their experience every day. We are a storytelling species. That's what determines our experience. There are lots of other things that you learn with an English major that are tremendously useful in whatever career path you choose. You learn to write. You learn critical analysis. You learn to read critically. And these are just fundamental capacities that everybody needs. There was something very interesting that Google did that I've always been struck by. They at one point did a kind of experiment in which they, hired for a set of jobs a bunch of people with technical training, and then they hired a bunch of people with humanities training. And they found after a number of years that the people with the humanities training actually did better than the people with the technical training. So I think the humanities are so important. I don't think anybody that thinks about the kinds of issues that are before us, this kind of STEM issues that are before us in our world, can't see that philosophy, that ethics aren't critical in making judgments about what we do in relationship to the pandemic, what we do in relationship to climate change. These they're fundamentally public policy questions and fundamentally ethical questions. And an education in the humanities is really a powerful tool to teach you to deal with that.
I think too, gives you an insight into human nature. Like there's nothing that's happening today, even the pandemic, that hasn't happened some other time. And we can read about how people in different times, handled it and gain insights into what went right, what went wrong, how did people feel about it.
Yes.
Gives us some empathy and perspective.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Boccaccio's The Decameron was a bunch of people sheltering from the plague that was in 14th century Italy at that time, and telling each other stories. That's where the Decameron came from. You have the Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. This is not the first pandemic in history, obviously.
Yeah. I'm going to check those out tonight. Actually, that's a great. Both of those are great recommendations. One thing I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this. A question that's very near and dear to my heart, and that's the Cal Bears football team.
Uh-huh.
I'm a lifelong season ticket holder.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question I want to ask is, are the Cal Bears ever going to make it back to the Rose Bowl? It's been 60 years.
Yeah, I've asked that question a lot by people, and they say, will I live to see the Cal Bears in a Rose Bowl? And I say, I don't know. How old are you? What's so funny is what some of our football fans have been saying this year is we really had a chance to go to the Rose Bowl this year, and wouldn't you know it, our football season has been at least postponed.
It's always the way.
Yes, it is.
There's always hope springs eternal. Next year.
Yes. And I was really glad to see the New York Times today, its main editorial was that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten made the right choice in postponing the football season. So I felt really justified because it wasn't, it was a clear decision when the presidents and chancellors of the Pac-12 made it. but it wasn't an easy decision. And
oh yeah, oh absolutely, yeah, yeah. And even I would have to agree that the players' safety is probably supersedes the need to beat Stanford.
yeah, that's probably right. And there's something very bizarre about saying that it's not safe enough for you to go to class, but it's safe enough to play football.
Exactly. Yeah. So one last question before we turn to our viewers. So this is such an absolutely crazy time to be starting college and also to be graduating from college. I can't imagine how bizarre it must be for these young people. Can what words of wisdom do you have for these students just setting foot at Berkeley for the first time right now, or leaving Berkeley?
Yeah. Well, I think that times of crisis are also times of opportunity when you have the opening to rethink things that you had taken for granted, things that have been obvious. There's a business strategist that I really like. His name is Vijay Govindarajan, and he says all businesses, institutions of any sort, organizations of any sort, should spend about 70% of their time doing their core business as well as they possibly can. But then it says you should always reserve some time for what he calls deliberate forgetting. And he says that often people don't think very much about deliberate forgetting. And that's one of the things about being in a crisis, is it causes you to question your assumptions. I think that's what has happened with Black Lives Matter, and with with more passion and urgency and consensus about systemic racism than I've certainly seen in my lifetime. So there are real opportunities in a crisis, and to be open to those opportunities is one piece of advice. Another piece of advice that I have is knock on doors, obviously not physical doors, but virtual doors. It's such an odd way to live, as we're in front of screens all the time. But people really want to help. So taking advantage of the digital tools that we have to try to take advantage of as many of Cal's opportunities as you want to take advantage of. There are people that really want to help you, want to make your Cal experience, even in these very different circumstances, as good as it possibly can be. And then it's not a trivial skill set to be able to be really adept at screens. So just as faculty are discovering a new muscle, so I think students might too. I'm about to teach my first online class. I have my first class tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to the experience of, well, how is this going to be different from the ways in which I've taught before? So I think, being alert to the opportunities of the current crisis, and then I always say to everybody, find a moment of Zen in every day.
What do you do to find that moment of Zen?
Oh, I just love natural beauty. I look for natural beauty. I play a lot of music. I love to read. So those are some of the ways in which I look for moments of Zen.
And what are you going to be teaching this fall?
I'm going to be teaching Frankenstein and its rewritings. Frankenstein has been a favorite book of mine for a long, long time, and I've taught it often. And one of the things that has struck me as so interesting is how many recent novelists have been rewriting Frankenstein. It seems to have a particular relevance right now in our world of artificial intelligence and imagining artificially created life. So we're going to read Frankenstein, and then we're going to read some of its modern rewritings.
Oh, that sounds really cool. The monster that won't go away.
Yes, right.
So, Sarah, do we have any questions from viewers?
Yeah, we do. And if you don't mind, I actually had a quick question for you, Carolyn.
Yeah.
So as a reporter, what is something that you've noticed at other institutions that has either differed from Berkeley's plans or just has been generally interesting to you?
Oh, well, it's kind of all over the map. I think each university has really different needs, different student bodies, different needs. The needs of a commuter college are really different than a place like Berkeley, where most students, come from out of the area. And also depending on, some universities have, a ton of first generation students or students who are working or low income students. And also, so they have different needs. My son goes to Humboldt State, and as soon as campus closed, I mean, he was getting contacted almost daily by advisors, professors, just this constant outreach to make sure that he didn't fall off the radar. I mean, I wasn't going to let him fall off the radar, but I think that there is a concern that a lot of students are just going to vanish, and that has definitely been the case in K through 12 education, and I'm sure it's happening at the university level too. So some universities are just really going that extra mile. Like, do you have everything you need? Do you have a tablet? Do you have Wi-Fi access? Do you have a place you can study?
Right.
Are you feeling stressed out? Do you need mental health services? I'm sure Berkeley's doing all those things too, but that is something I've been really impressed by over and over and over again at colleges large and small.
Okay, very interesting. All right, this next question is from Linda. Is there a plan to remind students who are not on campus now to register to vote where they are living? How about statewide from UCOP?
Yes, we are involved in a number of partnerships. One's with CalPERG, another is with the Pac-12 to get students to register to vote. It's so important this year. So here's a plug to anybody listening. If you're not registered to vote and you're old enough to vote, make sure that you register to vote.
Great. The next one is from...
Could I also make a plug for the census? If you haven't stood up and be counted, the census is also really important because it determines so many things. It determines congressional representation. It determines funding from the federal government. So it is really important to be counted in the census.
Definitely. The next question is from Jim Rainey. Some universities have raised tuition during COVID-19, saying costs have gone up. It seems that shutting down departments, buildings, etc., would cut costs. What is happening with university expenses? And this is interesting to me because I know we just published an article where you said the pandemic is very expensive.
Yes, it certainly is very expensive. There actually was a very interesting article today, or maybe it was yesterday, in the San Jose Mercury News, talking about how much more expensive it is to run a university during the pandemic. It's costing Berkeley $65 million more to run the campus. That's of the $340 million deficit. $65 million are increased costs because of the pandemic. And those costs break down into the following categories. First of all, testing. We're testing students in our dorms twice a week. We've also offered testing to any student in congregate living, fraternities, sororities, co-ops, also twice a week. Testing is costing us about $3 million a month. We also are, for our buildings, and all of our research buildings, the buildings that have research going on in them are open. And we have an increased cleaning schedule. We're cleaning them to a higher standard and than we usually do. And we're cleaning them not once a day, which is what our usual protocol was, but twice a day. So cleaning is more expensive. And then finally, we've invested a whole lot, about $20 million into remote instruction, trying to make it as good as it possibly can be. Part of that is I think it's about $4.5 million that we invested in a program that gives laptops to students that don't have laptops and hotspots to students that have really poor internet connectivity.
Wow. All right. That's a lot of money. Okay. The next question is from Alan. So the Cal Alumni Association is boosting virtual alumni get-togethers. Is the university doing any similar pushes for undergrads, particularly first-year and transfer students?
Yes, the Office of Student Affairs is working really hard on that. It began with Golden Bear orientation, which was virtual, but you did Golden Bear orientation in their groups. all of the organizations that serve particular populations of students, like the Fannie Lou Hamer Center, have special programs for students, and we're also trying to provide as many opportunities as we can. One of them is through the program Berkeley Connect, that groups about a dozen students with a graduate student. We're trying to do as many things as we can to create community, albeit it's a virtual community rather than a face-to-face community.
Great, that sounds great. And then I have a final question. So we were talking a little bit before the broadcast about how these past few years have been pretty chaotic. What big events from previous years have maybe helped prepare you a little bit to handle this pandemic, and what kinds of tasks have you been able to reuse?
That's a really good question. And in fact, what we did, I mean, first we had the fires, and that we had to cancel, close the university because of bad air quality. Then we had the power outages, which lasted longer than the bad air quality. And at that point, we decided as a campus that we really had to develop a set of both policies and tools for what we called instructional resilience. So there was a task force that was joint between the academic senate and the administration, that developed a set of policies and options for instructional resilience. One of the things that it recommended, this was before the pandemic, that every faculty member should have a week in their syllabus that could be remote in case we have power outages. We've now called that task force back together again, so that we really are trying to be as prepared and resilient as we can in response to the kinds of challenges that we have, whether they're from pandemics or fires or power outages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been quite the few years. Oh, Carolyn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a comment more than a question. You know, so much of the college experience, especially for freshmen, is the social aspect,
Yeah.
meeting new friends from new places and kind of expanding your mind that way. And now a lot of that social stuff is just gone. And that's got to be affecting student mental health also, I would think, and morale and so forth. I just thought it was interesting what you were talking about, how the Office of Student Affairs is trying to fix that. Or, I mean, I know it's impossible to replace a really good party, but
yeah, but we're really trying to enable students to make connections online. And I think all of us do it, that we have Zoom calls with friends that we can't see in person, and we're trying to do that. And what I keep saying to many, many audiences is this will end. There will be a day after the pandemic. Even though it feels like it's Groundhog Day and every day is exactly the same, it will end, and we will go back to the kind of in-person human connection that we so much value, both as a mode of education, but also just in terms of seeing people and socializing and making community.
Yeah, let's hope, huh?
Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to give before we wrap up?
I just want to thank everybody in the community for how resilient you have shown yourselves to be, how creative. I've just been so inspired time and time again by what our students have been doing, what our faculty has been doing, what our staff has been doing. A tiny example, students were so disappointed that they weren't get to experience their graduation this spring, that they created this Minecraft replica of the campus and did this virtual Berkeley University commencement. I mean, it's just amazing what people are doing. And so I'm just grateful for it and inspired by it.
All right, and you, Carolyn?
Well, I mean, as long as I've been alive, I mean, the university has always been kind of the institution that brings us all together. And, whether it's research or, the people, the students or the faculty, or it's always been, in times of crisis, the university is what sees us through. Not just Cal, I guess, but all institutes of higher learning. Yeah. So personally, I have faith that, Berkeley will see us through this one way or another. And, eventually we'll come out on the other side of this, and Cal will win a Rose Bowl, and everything will get back to normal.
Yeah, definitely. Well, all right. Thank you both so much for such a helpful conversation. I will take you off of video now.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. And last thing from me, you can come back next week for another talk. This broadcast, like all others, will be available for replay here on Crowdcast. And if you enjoyed today's show, you can visit the Daily Cal website, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Daily Cal. That's one way to support local journalism, is by reading and engaging with us online, as well as donating. If you want to text to donate, you can text DC71 to 202-858-1233. Again, that's text DC71 to 202-858-1233. Like we said before, and we'll say it again, the Daily Cal really needs your support if we want to stay open. And by the way, if you're a Berkeley student, the Daily Cal is hiring right now. Thank you so much to those of you who have already donated. Whatever you can give is really appreciated. We thank our sponsors, Liz Simons, Mechanics Bank, and the Cal Alumni Association. And finally, thank you to Chancellor Chris and Carolyn for joining us. We'll see you next week.